is recovering from his circumcision, and Hashem doesn't want him to have guests, doesn't want him to have pain, to have to take care of guests. Beis Yutes. And Hashem makes it hotter so that no one will disturb him. Then Hashem sees Avram has pain, so Hashem sends these three people, or angels dressed like people, to Avram so he could do the mitzvah of having guests. And Avram goes in the middle of his conversation with Hashem to go greet the guests, and teaches us the principle that it's more important to take care of guests than to greet the divine presence himself. So what's peculiar about this is a couple of things, as we'll see in this last segment of the Farbrengen. Something that right away comes up is they weren't even guests in the first place. So they were just angels. So what was the point of Hashem causing Avram to do something which wasn't even real? So let's go right to it. So Hashem changes nature, and he sends the angels who were meant to go to Abraham. Abraham used to sing angels. He sends them in the guise of men because Avram felt bad he did not have guests, and therefore the angels that were supposed to come anyways, because angels had to do 3 missions to inform Sarah that she would have a child and to destroy the city of Sodom and to heal Avram, they were meant to come anyways. What was unique was that God sent them in the guise of men. Because Avram thought that they were men, he was able to do the mitzvah of welcoming guests. And the Gemara learns from this, it's more important to welcome a guest than to greet the divine presence. So Avram asks Hashem to wait for him. He has to go greet the guests. Why? Because it's more important to greet guests than to greet Hashem. So the way you read the story, Avram didn't actually do a mitzvah. They weren't really people. They were just angels that don't need to eat. So it wasn't really a mitzvah welcoming guests. And even if you say there are different opinions about what they actually did in Avram's house. Did they eat or they just pretend to eat? Even if you say they actually ate, they only ate because of the honor of Avram. They didn't need to eat. So, or they ate because the Torah says when you go into a place, you have to do the custom of that place, or the honor of Avram, whatever it was, but they didn't really need to eat. Other opinion says they didn't even pretend, they just pretended to eat. But even if you say they actually ate, it wasn't because they needed the food, it was just because of the honor of Avram, or because when you go to a city, you're supposed to act in the manner of that city. So it wasn't really welcoming guests. So the question is, why did God change nature for something which wasn't even real? It comes out that Avram wasn't really allowed to leave Hashem and to go greet the guests. Why not? Why wasn't he allowed to go? Because they weren't really guests. If you're greeting guests, then you're allowed to leave Hashem's presence to greet guests. What if you think they're guests and they aren't guests? So you could say, well, Avram didn't know, it was an accident, but the Gemara says, that a tzaddik never makes a mistake, especially a tzaddik level of Avraham Avinu, who is a chariot to God's will, beyond a regular level of tzaddik. So how could it be that Avram made this mistake? Let's say you would discover one day, you would read somewhere in the Torah, that Avraham gave charity to people who were undeserved, people who did not, people you're not supposed to give charity to. So you would right away wonder, well, how is it possible that Avram did that? And even by accident, he's a tzaddik. And here it's worse, because if you give tzedakah to those who you're not supposed to give tzedakah to, okay, there's a preference of who is supposed to receive your tzedakah first, but it's still tzedakah. Here, Avram didn't do it all, the mitzvah of welcoming guests. So how could it be that the Torah, which is the Torah of truth, tells us something which is true? It's more important to welcome a guest than to welcome Hashem. How can we learn something which is true for something which wasn't true? Avram did something which was seemingly against the halacha. He left Hashem's presence for the sake of people which weren't really guests. So how could Avram do something that is against halacha? And we learn from this thing he did, which was against halacha, that we're supposed to welcome guests, even and to prefer that even when we're, so to speak, welcoming the Shekhinah. So we have to say although Avram thought they were guests, they were people, and they weren't actually people, we have to say that his welcoming of the guests was real. There was something that he did that was actually legitimate, and it was actually Shalom Aleichem, Masmachter. So for listeners who just tuned in, what we've discovered is like this: Avraham Avinu is in the middle of talking to Hashem, and he goes to greet these guests. You cannot say that he was doing something which wasn't real. You can't say that he was leaving Hashem's presence because he thought he was having guests and they weren't really guests. Because if so, Hashem made a miracle and Hashem caused these angels to look like people for no reason. Let's pretend that let's give him something that looks like he'll be not really be doing a mitzvah. It can't be. It can't be that Hashem is giving Avram something that isn't real. We learn halacha from this. We learn that's more important to greet guests than to greet the Shekhinah. How can we learn that from something which isn't real? How come Hashem is making a miracle for something which isn't real? I remember there's a discussion about chinuch, about education. Let's say you want to give your child a lulav and esrog, right? Do you have to give them a kosher lulav and esrog in order to do the mitzvah, in order to educate them mitzvah lulav and esrog? The mitzvah of chinuch, once educating your child, do you have to give them a real one? They sell in the store chinuch sets. Chinuch sets means that they're not kosher. So the question is that correct or not? So there's a discussion among different achrayim. One opinion is the chinuch is to get your children accustomed to performing mitzvahs. So you have to give them something which will get them in the routine of doing it. It doesn't have to actually be a mitzvah. Other opinion is no. Chinuch is about getting them accustomed to doing a mitzvah. So it's not a mitzvah. You're not accustoming them into anything, and therefore even the sets you get for your child has to be a kosher set. That's why there's all discussion about giving your child a lulav and esrog as a gift. Once you give it to your child, you can't take it back because the children are only able to receive, they're not able to give back. So you can't give your child your lulav and esrog. Can you not give it to him as a gift, and he'll think it's as a gift? So according to this, no, you can't, because you have to accustom to a real mitzvah. If it's your lulav and esrog, then he's not doing the mitzvah. So on that note, we'll see a similar approach that Rebbe gives to this discussion, and we'll see, as Rebbe says, how the reveal parts of Torah and the interdimension of Torah sync completely, how it's really one Torah. And what we learned earlier this week will give us insight in the halacha, in the performance of Avram of welcoming the guests. What did we learn earlier this week? Avram and Yaakov, they fulfill God's commandments in a spiritual way. It says they fulfilled the Torah before it was given, but what they actually do, they did it in a spiritual way, they didn't do it in a physical way. How do I know they didn't do it in a physical way? For example, mitzvah of putting on tefillin. If you say they put on tefillin, in the tefillin it says how God took us out of Egypt. So you can't say that they did an actual mitzvah of tefillin physically because there's no Egypt. So, and it's also clear that they did mitzvah spiritually. Mitzvah of tefillin, for example, again, we find that the Zohar says that when Yaakov Avinu was peeling these sticks in Parshas Vayeira, he was accomplishing the same thing as we do when we put on tefillin. But those sticks didn't remain holy. Those sticks could be thrown out. It actually says it's hard to say that there was nothing that was changed in those sticks. There must be something changed. Yaakov Avinu must be something that changed. But nevertheless, the main impact of Yaakov was spiritual, and he just did an action physically that mirrored what he was doing spiritually. He was drawing down something spiritual, and he couldn't bring that spirituality to the physical sticks he was drawing the spiritual energy to. There's a similar concept in chassidus called Leviathan. You know, Leviathan is the fish we're going to eat when Mashiach will come, but chassidus talks about two kinds of souls. There's souls called Leviathan, souls called Shor Haber. Mashiach will come, it says we're going to eat the ox and we're going to eat the fish. And Chassidus says that the ox and the fish are connected to two kinds of tzaddikim. The ox represents tzaddikim whose main focus is in the physical world. They do physical things, physical mitzvahs. And the fish, those who swim in the sea, represent those souls whose main focus is not to make an impact in the physical world, but to swim in the spiritual. Just like a fish is submerged in the water, so too these souls are submerged in their divine energy. So just like when you look at the water, you don't see the fish, you just see the source, you see the water. So too there are souls which, for them, the first reality is their divine source in them. They don't feel themselves to exist, they feel just their divine source. So Shimon Bar Yochai, for example, he was that level. So he didn't actually eat matzah. He didn't eat matzah on Pesach. It says in the Gemara that he was in a cave, and what did he have? He had a carob tree. You can't make carob matzah. So how do you do the mitzvah of matzah? I do many mitzvahs couldn't do. Kiddush, many mitzvahs couldn't do. So his neshama, there's an altar writes in Parsha Shmini that his soul was a Leviathan kind of soul, and he wasn't about. He was able to draw down into the world things without doing the physical mitzvah. That's his soul was meant to do. So in a similar note, Aaron and Yaakov were similar, not exactly the same as the Leviathan kind of souls, because the Leviathan souls don't do any physical actions. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did do physical actions, but their focus wasn't the physical actions. Their focus was the spiritual engagement that they were trying to achieve while they were doing the physical actions. I think of this like maybe like davening and saying the words out loud. What's the point of saying the words out loud? So in Tanya it says you're supposed to say the words out loud because you want to draw down the godly energy into the physical world. You want to bring it to your whole body. You want to bring it to the world. But to say the words of davening and it makes impact the physical world. Before the Torah was given, was there a point in davening out loud? Was there a point in saying the words? So what does the Gemara say? When you say the words out loud, it helps you concentrate more. So it's not just about your physical impact in the world. It also helps you think better. So by Aaron and Yaakov, the focus wasn't on the physical impact of the world. They did physical actions, but the focus was how that will bring them to more spiritual. They did things physically, but the focus wasn't the physical action. It was only their actions were Smaisa Abis and Labanim. Their deeds empower their children after giving the Torah. So they weren't able to actually draw down into the physical world, but they did empower us to do the same thing. So that's why their mitzvahs didn't have to really be exact with a specific formula that our mitzvahs have to be. Our mitzvahs have to be square and that have to be black, and they didn't have to follow such a specific formula. Yaakov was using sticks to the mitzvah of tefillin because his focus on the physical action wasn't to impact the physical world. That's what we do after getting the Torah. Their mitzvah is just to be a sign. It's a siman, something that is a sign for their children, something that paves the way for us to impact the physical world. But they weren't actually impacting the physical world. They were just making a sign for us to do it. You hear the difference? They weren't impacting the physical world. They were making a step towards our ability to impact the physical world. It was a siman, it's a sign. We find a similar thing even after giving the Torah. It says it in the Torah and Tanakh about Yecheskel. Hashem told Yecheskel, lie down on your right side. Yecheskel, lie down on your left side. Yecheskel, pretend you're going out on a trip to exile and hold on to things that you'll need if you go out to exile. Yecheskel is getting a prophecy from Hashem. In order that a prophecy should actually be manifest in the physical world and it should have an impact, there has to be there has to be something done physically for it to be drawn down. Everybody once told Dr. Zelle by Farbrengen, in the middle of Caucus actually, that was said Rebbe gave him from his cake and wine, something from Rebbe. I remember it was cake and wine, something. I don't remember. And Rebbe says in the Gemara that the kohenim eat the sacrifices, and the owners of the sacrifice get an atonement. So Rebbe was basically saying he's a doctor, so he should eat from the Rebbe's cake or wine, whatever it was, and that will bring a healing to his patients. Kohenim echel ma'alos chaper. The kohenim eat, and the owners are the owners of the sacrifices have an atonement. Eat you. Actually told him, I think. It's not the same thing, but another Jew named Rabbi Tiffenbrein, who was an incredible artist, Rebbe told him to put into his paint, from the wine of Cashapp, I think, Dr. Zalkson, something similar. Don't put in his medicine. I don't remember what it was. Anyways, so there had to be something. Just to open our ears to this concept a little bit. I think the first time that the Rebbe, that was the first time, but it was something that changed the relationship between Dr. Zalkson and the Rebbe's instructions to him was the following story. The Rebbe asked him if a certain patient there's any way he could be healed, and he said no. They went back into his room. The Rebbe asked him again. He understood the answer has to be yes. And many times the Rebbe would send people not to a doctor as a friend, but to Dr. Zalkson. He ever wanted that the divine blessing that's miraculous should come through the garments of nature. So he'll be the doctor that okays whatever the Rebbe wants to bring down to the world. A friend of mine, he had a issue with his skin, and he asked. It was Rabbi Glitzenstein. His father asked for bracha for him. Rebbe said, "Ask a doctor as a friend." So he goes over to one of his friends. He says, "Listen, whatever you say is going to work. Make this easy." So his friend says to him, "Okay, he should rub the skin with oil, and it'll go away." And Baruch Hashem, whatever. So in order for the prophecy of Hashem to have a manifest physical impact, so Hashem tells the prophet to do something. Yecheskel didn't have to actually go into exile. He's in a comfortable place. He's not in exile. He has to hold on to tools that you would use to go into exile. He had to. The exile wasn't happening right away. The exile was happening years and years later. So regarding what Avos and Yaakov were doing, they had to do something physically, but why did they do something physically? Just to be a sign for us. It didn't have to actually impact the physical world in the similar way that our mitzvahs do, and therefore they don't have to follow a very specific formula. Hashem told Abraham, walk around Israel, walk to the length of the land and the width of the land, walk around Israel, and that will empower your children to conquer the land of Israel. He didn't actually conquer the land of Israel. It was just an example of the later conquering land of Israel. He had to make a sign for it. So too regarding the mitzvahs the Avos did. They empower our mitzvahs. They had to be done physically because they're a sign for us. However, number one, the focus wasn't to impact the physical. That wasn't their focus. It was to just be a sign. And therefore it wasn't so important the details of what they did. So now let's go back to Avraham Avinu's welcoming the guests. Avraham had to do physical, he had to do a physical action of welcoming guests. He had to slaughter the cows and he had to prepare the food for them. Why? Because he's empowering us to do a physical action. But nevertheless, regarding Avram's activity, he had to do something that's physical. Regarding the impact on the angels, they have to be physical. He had to engage in doing the act of welcoming the guests. What happens with the foods that he's occupied with, that doesn't matter. That's not the main thing. Whether they actually go to the guests or not doesn't matter. His activity of welcoming the guests is what's important. Therefore, although they looked like people, and they weren't really people, they were just angels. Nevertheless, what was going on inside Avraham? Avraham Avinu had a feeling of kindness. He wanted to do kindness to them. And therefore, he did actions of welcoming them physically. So his activity empowered his children to do the same thing. So nothing was missing. It was true. It was there. It was real. And even if you say that, well, he didn't actually welcome the guests, and he left the divine presence to go do this, why would he leave the divine presence to do something which wasn't real? Well, his level of seeing divine presence was equal to his welcoming the guests. In other words, it was before the giving of the Torah. So you couldn't really welcome divine presence in the way that could be possible after giving the Torah. It's like Yankel. Yankel comes into a bakery, and he says, can I smell the bread? And the baker says, you're not buying anything here? I just want to smell the bread. I just want to hang it. You want to have to pay. So he holds the dollar. Say, look at the money. Because if I'm just smelling the bread, you just look at the money. In a similar way, Lahavdil, Avraham Avinu is not actually welcoming guests, and he's not actually welcoming the Shekhinah the same way it's possible after giving the Torah. So for his welcoming of the Shekhinah, it was for that, what surpassed that was his activity in welcoming guests. So he showed us how to welcome guests in his activity. He was a sign for us, even though it wasn't the same kind of thing. Now they've said something unbelievable. It sounds like so funny when you read this story. Hashem didn't know that the Am was going to have pain from having these guests, and therefore Hashem said, "Oh, let's make it hot." Oh, he doesn't like it hot. Let me bring them. What's going on? Why didn't Hashem to begin with not make it hot? So Avraham Avinu wouldn't be upset in the first place, and he would have regular guests.
Maybe it was to keep the other people out of the way, so the guests would have an uninterrupted encounter.
Interesting. That's not what the Rashi says. Rashi says that Hashem saw he is having pain, and therefore he sent to him these guests.
To just give him a mitzvah and distract.
So question
make
is,
it easy for him to do the mitzvah to alleviate the pain.
Well, it wasn't easy. He had to work really hard.
I know it wasn't easy, but I mean for him it was easy, not for us.
Focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, rub the oil. For Abraham, it was just rubbing the oil.
Listen to this. Rebbe says, Avraham Avinu had a feeling of kindness, right? The reason he had this feeling that was so overwhelming, he was in pain, he didn't have guests, was a result of God appearing to him. He didn't before his kindness was at a level that if someone showed up, okay, I'll take care of them. That's how his kindness was before. And he enjoyed that and he did that. But after Hashem appeared to Avraham, he saw Hashem. That caused the divine source of Avraham. What's the divine source of Avraham? He's a chariot to God's kindness. That was manifest in Abraham. Since it was manifest in Abraham, it was expressed. He wanted to express his kindness. So it didn't actually bother him that he couldn't do kindness before. It was only because Hashem appeared to Avraham that it bothered him he couldn't express his kindness. It was a result of God appearing to Avraham. So that's why the Torah says that Hashem made it hot. He didn't want him to have pain. And then only after Hashem appeared to him does he have pain. When did Hashem see he has pain? Only after Hashem appears to him. He didn't have pain before. So now we understand why there's a relationship between the verse, Ab lifted his eyes, he saw there's guests, and the verse before, God appears to Ab. The reason why there were guests, and the reason why there was a need for guests is because God appeared to Abram. If God wouldn't appear to Abram, he wouldn't feel bad. It was a revelation of Hashem that made him more active, more in need to do kindness. It reminds me of like the Rebbe Cashapp, who the previous Rebbe asked Rebbe Cashapp, what do we do after Yom Kippur? What's next? So now to start doing Shuv. Because you experience Yom Kippur, you know how much more there is to do. Because Hashem revealed himself to Abram, so then he feels, I need to do kindness. I'm not doing enough. How can I express my kindness? How can I help someone? So it's similar to what chassidus says about the various attributes of godliness, that sovereignty is something that's only created by someone outside of you. In other words, if someone outside of you asks you to become their king, to be their leader, then do you have this feeling of wanting to be a leader? But without someone else, you don't have, that feeling will not be there at all. That's unique to Malchus. The other divine spheres, like Chesed, you don't need someone else to arouse that. If you have the attribute of kindness, you don't need someone outside of you to feel like Avram had a feeling of kindness, even though there was no one around to do kindness too. Chassidus says because Malchus is Helm She'en Metzias and Chesed is Helm Metzias. Malchus is a sphere which doesn't really exist. It exists, but it's so it's such a subtle form, such a abstract form, that unless there's someone there asking for it, it's not going to trigger your feeling, I want to be a leader. However, Chesed is something you have inside of you in a very manifest way, and therefore even without someone outside of you, it's still there. So Avram, because he had Chesed in him, and God reveals himself to Avram, the Chesed in him was like, I want to do something. So what's the bottom line? What are we supposed to learn from this? All this we learn about how to deal with inspiration. Avram Avinu is inspired. Hashem reveals himself to Avram. What does he do? Right away he does something with it. He doesn't just like, I was inspired, that was great. Right away he moves. So similar way the Rebbe says, if you feel that Hashem's inspiring you, Hashem is lifting you up, to right away do something. Otherwise inspiration will go away. There was a Jew named Rabbi Dunin. He used to, in a very pure heart, and the Rebbe would show him a lot of, and so he was so excited about the Rebbe's affection, somersaults in the middle of the street sometimes. He was online to eat with other boys, and to line for everyone's holding their tray to get food from the area of the yeshiva, and he would do a somersault in the middle of the line. And everyone was like, "Dude, relax." And so he was wondering if it was a good thing or not a good thing to do somersaults. That's in Gemara. That's what say because people shouldn't. You don't want to cause people make fun of you. So was it right or wrong? So he asked the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, once you had some Torah, you should do a somersault. The rest of the year, when you feel inspiration, should translate into learning Torah and the mitzvahs more beautifully. So we have inspiration like Abraham to bring it down to something practical. So even though by Abraham, his action wasn't real, right? His action wasn't real. It seems his action wasn't real because it weren't actually guests. So too says by ourselves. Even if the thing you're doing doesn't feel so real, do it. That will eventually cause it to become internalized with you. Just like Abraham Avinu, he didn't have an opportunity to actually do a mitzvah in a way that will impact the physical world, yet he did whatever he was able to do, and that empowered his children to be able to absorb it later, to bring godliness to the world in a physical, manifest way after giving the Torah. Then it concludes with Farbrengen and says like this, interesting. We're in the time of Mincha. Bais Bezalel time of Mincha time. Mincha is a time of divine grace. As we say in the line before we take out the Torah, on Mincha, on Shabbos, we say, Manisi Lasi, Elocha Hashem Yisratzin, Elokim Rab Chazdech. Elokim with your great kindness. What do you mean? Isn't Elokim the name of Hashem, which is about justice? Why do we say Elokim with your kindness? And the answer is, on Mincha, it's a time of such divine grace that even the name of Hashem, which is about justice, is transformed to kindness. Shabbos says, what should we do on Shabbos? Shabbos is similar to the inspiration, which is higher than the world, and days of the week are more about the Shabbos is like Ar Mitzvah Yaakov, and the days of the week are like the children. Shabbos is the intellect. Days of the week are the emotions. So, in order for Shabbos should have an inspiration, days of the week, the Rebbe says, you have to right away connect something on Shabbos with something practical you're going to do, and things that you're allowed to do on Shabbos as well. You have to already start. Like I remember one Farbrengen never said that we should do kindness on Shabbos. How so? You should pour another person l'chaim. You should do something already. You could do tzedakah on Shabbos. You could help another yid on Shabbos. Why do we do something to want to bring down the inspiration of Shabbos, which is in a more of a higher kind of form? It's more spiritual, and the days of the week are compared to the children. Shabbos like the obvious, and the days of the week like the children, the midas, seichel, and midas. So to bring it down, do something practical. Days of the week. All right. We're doing Shabbos, but you shouldn't stop doing somersaults. You for sure. Your somersaults are you're making young with your somersaults. Everyone has different.
So it's funny this idea of connect your mitzvah